Welcome along if you've just joined us. 7:05 on Sunday evening. It's Yasmin here with you. Now, would you swear an oath of allegiance? The government is drawing up plans to make all civil servants and holders of public office swear an oath to uphold British values. Writing in the Sunday Times, the Community Secretary Sajid Javid said it's not possible for people to play a positive role in public life unless they accept such basic values as democracy, equality and freedom of speech. Well, to discuss this, we're joined by Anthony Glees, Professor of Politics at the University of Buckingham, and Dilly Hussain. Dilly is from Bedford and is the Deputy Editor of Five Pillars, a website focused on news for the British Muslim community. Anthony, let's come to you first. Good evening to you, first of all.
Good evening.
So I guess I should, before we get into the whys and wherefores, would you swear an oath of allegiance?
Absolutely, without any question whatsoever.
Right. And why would you do it, and to what end?
Well, Yasmin, I think that what Sajid Javid is asking people to do is absolutely right. He's asking them to swear an oath of allegiance in order that they can best be integrated into mainstream British society. The idea that there should be parallel communities in the United Kingdom, that the kind of multicultural aspect of everything should be celebrated. He's saying, well, I don't think that's right. I think we should all try and sing from the same song sheet. We shouldn't all be the same. We should respect each other's different beliefs, and people should have different beliefs. But basically, we should all be proud to be part of a country that is democratic, that is tolerant of others, that tolerates their views even if one disagrees with their views, that believes in equality, gender equality, equality of different ethnicities, believes in democracy, the democratic process, and crucially respects the law, and I'm quoting here from Sajid Javid, respects the law even if one thinks the law is an ass. And I say, yes, absolutely.
Okay.
However,
right.
There's a however here.
Go on.
It's important that the government not be hypocritical here, because who is it at present that is saying we're not sure we are going to respect the law? It's the government, taking people to court over whether parliamentary sovereignty, which has been a core principle of our democracy in this country for hundreds of years, whether parliamentary sovereignty should kick in.
Okay, well, let's not. That's a different direction. But Anthony, what you said is you agree with the principle of swearing an oath of allegiance, and you think it could work. But can I ask you, why would repeating certain words every morning or whenever it might be that you're asked to say it make you actually believe them? It's something that we as a nation have looked at the US for, and by and large we can often be cynical about it and say, well, that's a very American thing to do. It's not very British. And just because you say something we know doesn't mean you believe it.
Words are very important, I think. And, I'm a professor. I suppose I make my living out of words. And I think you say something, so do you, Yasmin. But if you say something and you say, I swear allegiance to these things, then there is not only a very good chance that a part of you will accept what you've said, but those people you come into contact with, if you're a teacher, your students, if you're a doctor, your patients, they will respect you for your fundamental oath of allegiance to a certain set of core values. Right. And I think that is very, very important if Britain is to prosper.
Okay, thank you, Anthony. Dilly Hussain is listening to that. Dilly.
Yeah, I think some of the comments made by Professor Glees is quite ironical, where he talks about mutual respect and tolerance, yet here we have an initiative which will essentially force people to subscribe to a set of arbitrary values. I mean, all a state can ever expect or demand from its citizens is for them to abide by the law of the land. Anything else besides that would be an intrusion of someone's private beliefs, which goes against the very liberal foundations of this country. And this is exactly what Vince Cable said some years ago at the Fabian Society. For example, my Islamic values teaches me to be good to my neighbors, to contribute positively to society, and not force my beliefs down people's throats. So it's rather ironic that we're now talking about mutual tolerance, mutual respect, respecting each other's views, yet we're somehow being forced to subscribe to a set of values to show how loyal and good we are. I mean, the professor mentioned America, and you also mentioned America. When we talk about loyalty oaths, it reminds me of the very unfortunate period of the McCarthy period, and that was all about, curtailing freedom of speech and political dissidents. And let's look at the state of America now. I mean, in schools, people have to swear an oath of allegiance, but go and ask Black Americans what the situation is and whether they feel like an integral part of their society. Ask the Muslims who are being attacked and their mosques are being firebombed. They swear their oath of allegiance every day at school. How does that work for integration?
Dilly, can I ask you?
Be clear about integration, which is two ways, and assimilation, which is one way, and it's being enforced.
But Dilly, if we had an oath of allegiance that, in itself, the wording in the oath respected the religious beliefs of one another, whatever they may be, and it incorporated religious beliefs into it, just to pick up on your earlier note, would that make a difference for you? But also just the mere fact of repeating something daily and starting to question it, starting to perhaps engage with it and starting to go with it eventually, do you not think that might work?
No, that would be assuming that, that it will work at some point. I mean, look, different people have different interpretations of what British values means, whilst others have completely different set of belief systems. Yet both can be law-abiding, tax-paying citizens who want to contribute positively to society and want the best well-being and safety of the society. This oath of allegiance is essentially an inquisition of those who may disagree with those values, which have been defined by the Tories. Where's the application of mutual tolerance and respect here?
Anthony Glees.
Well, of course, I couldn't disagree with Dilly more, and particularly his opening gambit to you. He said, "Well, why should people swear an oath of allegiance to arbitrary values?" He said, "Arbitrary values." The whole point is that respect for the law, even if you think the law is an ass, tolerating the views of others, even if you disagree with them, a belief in equality, democracy, and the democratic process are not arbitrary values. And if Dilly Hussain believes they are arbitrary values, I'm afraid he's living in the wrong country. And I think that's what Sajid Javid wants to flesh out, that there are people in the United Kingdom who do not share these core values. And I'm saying I think our government should share them. It's very important that we have a government that remains committed to the European Convention on Human Rights, for example. As we know, Theresa May said that in this Parliament it's not going to be looked at, but it is her ambition to abolish it. I don't think that's compatible with what Sajid Javid says should be in the oath of allegiance. But these aren't arbitrary values. As to beliefs, we live in a country, and I'm pleased to live in a country, where you can believe whatever you want to. However, you cannot do whatever you want. You cannot say whatever you want. And that's got nothing to do with Muslims or anything like that. It has always been like that in this country. I mean, Yasmin, you work for the BBC. You will be very aware that if the BBC says untrue things about people, it will end up in court paying a vast amount of money for libeling them. And inciting people to kill other people has been a criminal offence in Britain for over 100 years, long before anti-terror legislation. So actually, I'm rather disturbed by what Dilly Hussain thinks. I would beg him to consider again, if he's a man of influence, arbitrary values are not things that you can, not words you can use to describe a belief in equality and democracy. And if that's really what he thinks, he needs to go to a country where they do not believe in those things.
Okay, let's put Dilly is listening to this. Dilly, you're free to comment back.
It's a very concerning undertone of Professor Glees' tone. I was born here, and just because I happen to disagree with how these values have been, formulated, that all of a sudden, if I disagree with them, that I'm being told to go elsewhere. I think that's rather unfortunate. But let's address the point what I actually meant. When I said an arbitrary set of values, what I meant was that British citizens haven't certainly contributed towards defining this set of values, which will then be used in a legislative manner. Rather, they have been defined and now implemented by the Tories. You and I, Yasmin, haven't had a say on what these values means, and nor has Professor Glees, though he happens to agree with them. That's what I meant by arbitrary set of values. They're not organic. No one's contributed in, or as stakeholders as to what these values should mean, but now they're being used to kind of as a litmus test as to who's loyal, who's integrated, and so forth. This is highly problematic. And I'd also like to make another point. The point is the respect for rule of law and other such things. We already have existing laws in place for when they are breached, when they are broken, the law enforcement agencies will do what they need to do. Why do you need to swear an oath of allegiance? To show how loyal you are, how integrated you are? It's rather draconian in its nature, if you ask me.
Let's put that to Professor Glees. Professor Glees, are the values that you're talking about, as Dilly said there are already things in place to enshrine those, to protect those. Why do we need extra wording for us to swear an oath to those every morning to mean that we believe in them more?
Well, first of all, because there are people like Dilly around, and when he says arbitrary values in reference to a belief in equality, a belief in democracy and the democratic process, either he doesn't know what arbitrary means or he does know what arbitrary means, and it's important, therefore, that he understands this is a country, and it's got nothing to do with who's born here or not born here. It's got to do with whether you accept these core values of democracy.
Anthony, let Dilly come back on that as to what his definition of the values that you're talking about.
Well, like I said, he's using these, the professor is using these values as a litmus test as to who belongs here and who doesn't. Can the listeners and yourself not see the problem with that? That is highly problematic. At the end of the day, if I believe that the democratic system isn't the best political system to govern mankind, but yet I choose to stay here, do I need to now be singled out and perceived as a sub kind of renegade or an extremist? No, of course not. How about we ask the millions who decide not to participate in elections because they don't believe this system is democratic? They don't believe the first past the poll is democratic. They believe that proportional representation is the true form of democracy. The current democracy that we have is certainly not a democracy according to the classical Athenian definition. So what I'm trying to say is that people can espouse these views, yet live here happily, peacefully, coexist and abide by the law of the land. Why can we not just do that? Why are we having a muscular, secular liberal approach in forcing people to assimilate to a set of values? And this very initiative goes against the liberal foundations of this state.
Okay.
All the state can ever ask of is for the citizens to abide by the law of the land.
Anthony?
Well, I don't, as I'm saying that for the third time, I could not disagree with Dilly Hussain more. I think it is entirely unacceptable to the vast majority of British people, including the vast majority of British Muslim people, that somebody who says he's not a Democrat should be allowed to influence public opinion here in the United Kingdom. We live by democracy in this country. We can have a discussion.
We do, which means that we can disagree with it as well.
Exactly. Well, no, excuse me. That is absolutely not the case. If you say you don't accept democracy, then you are not just capable of trying to undermine it through peaceful means, but also through violent means. And Dilly talked about the United States of America. I didn't comment. I actually think it's a very good thing that American school children swear an oath of allegiance to the fundamental values that have made America the greatest democracy in the world, even if they vote for things that one wouldn't want to vote for oneself. I accept that we may not all be Trump supporters here. I'm certainly not one of them. But having those school kids vote, state their allegiance, swear their allegiance to the American flag and its principles every morning is the best guarantee there is. It's not a perfect one, but the best guarantee there is that America will continue to be the greatest free democracy in the world.
Anthony, can I ask you?
If you had people swearing that they weren't going to abide by democratic decision, you'd very quickly have violence and civil war.
But that's very different to what you just said, Anthony. And I want to take you back to that point of, if someone doesn't believe in democracy or they doesn't believe in our political system, they may choose not to vote. But you said that if they can choose a non-violent means, it also means that they can choose a violent means. Surely that's a huge leap to take of someone who decides not to vote one day to then taking up arms against the system they live in.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, the whole of European history in the 20th century shows very clearly that when people do not respect the basic rules of democracy, the rights but also the responsibilities that go with democracy, they leave the floor open to extremists and totalitarians.
But if you're a bit politically apathetic, for example, Anthony, it doesn't mean that you don't believe in the rule of law. That's two different things.
Well, excuse me, I don't think that people should be politically apathetic. And I think it's one thing if
But it doesn't mean that that would lead to violence in them.
Well, it could do. It could do, because if they do not believe in democracy, then they represent a pool of people from whom extremists and terrorists can emerge. If you believe in democracy, you cannot pursue violence against the democratically elected government. I did not vote for Brexit. I think it's total madness. However, I believe we have to go through with it because we are a democracy. They got a majority. End of story.
Okay, Dilly.
Yes, I mean, look, you've probably got thousands of listeners who have tuned in, and I'm confident that they're rational and smart enough to kind of understand and absorb the toxic rhetoric and underlying tone of Professor Glees' statements. I mean, if people don't want to respect the rule of law, right, there are existing laws to do with that. But if someone believes in an alternative belief system or political system which would be better in terms of governing it, then maybe we should ask the thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of expats living in Saudi Arabia, living in Qatar, living in the Gulf, and working in the Muslim majority world and elsewhere to perhaps come back. I'm sure they're living out there on a fantastic tax-free salary, but believing that, you know what, the governing system in UK is much better. But I'm pretty much okay where I am. We're not going to ask them to come back here just because they believe that the democratic system in the UK is better than, let's say, the system in Saudi Arabia or the system in Qatar or the system in Kuwait. Do you understand? It's absolutely absurd how the professor has made that huge unsubstantiated link between someone believing in an alternative ruling system and linked it to violence.
But is it, Dilly, is it the thin end of a wedge? Is it the thin end of a wedge of people who don't agree with the system that they live in, some of the beliefs of the country that they live in? I'm not saying make the leap. I'm saying, is it the thin end of the wedge?
Again, what are we all basing this on? That means we've got around 18 to 25 million people in this country who, according to Professor Glees, are extremists on the verge of taking up arms against the government. That's how many people, roughly thereabouts, that choose not to vote every general election, right? Because they don't believe that this system necessarily delivers on their political hopes. They don't necessarily believe that this system is essentially democratic. But according to Professor Glees, they're now on a conveyor belt to raise arms against the government. Absolutely absurd. And also the whole kind of assumption that if you don't subscribe to these values, then you should just leave the country. That is absurd. It's crazy. We talk about mutual tolerance, we talk about respect for each other's beliefs, and then we come out with this kind of rhetoric, and it's highly problematic, highly divisive, and it's counterproductive to social cohesion.
Okay, we're going to have to leave it there. I'm going to say thank you to both of you, Anthony Glees, Professor of Politics at the University of Buckingham, and Dilly Hussain, Deputy Editor of 5 Pillars, which is a website focused on news for the British Muslim community. My thanks to both of you for that.